Hey YouTube, Ed here from Jack of All Trades. So today what we're going to do is I've got this machete. It was an old machete that my father had at the hunting cabin for quite a few years, and it was all old and rusty and dull, and the handle was broken on it. He had it all taped up with duct tape, and it was in poor condition. So I cleaned up the machete and I got it back into a functional state. And all I've got is this canvas military scabbard for it, which I guess is okay, but it's not horribly functional. I really don't have any intention of putting this thing on my hip and carrying it through the jungle. Really what I wanted to use it for was to, just do some miscellaneous brushing, or if I have a need to whack something small down, I can have this machete with me. So I'd like to carry it on my four-wheeler or my ATV. And this scabbard really isn't very conducive to doing that. So the other night I was watching YouTube videos, and I was watching how Japanese sword makers were making the scabbards for a samurai sword out of wood. And I got to thinking, what a great idea. I'll make a scabbard for this out of wood. So what I did was I took a 2x4 and I cut it down dimensionally to the sizes I want, and the size is irrelevant. Really doesn't matter what the size is. These particular boards are about 2 3/4 inches long, and they're just shy of 5/8 of an inch thick. But I had an old scabby 2x4 laying around, and the edges were, it was a typical stud. The edges weren't all that great. They were rounded over. So I ran them through the table saw, and I got them dimensionally correct and everything nice and flat and true. I run them through a planer to make sure everything was flat, and I am going to make a scabbard out of these two pieces to hold this so I can mount it to my ATV, so that when I'm out in the woods and I'm doing whatever I'm doing on my ATVs, if I'm hunting or trapping or even just riding around and I have a need for a machete, I've got one mounted already on the ATV, and I got to make it in such a way so that it doesn't fall out and that it'll be readily accessible and useful. So let's dispense with the chit chat and let's get right into how I'm going to make this scabbard for my machete out of these two pieces of board. All right, so I've got my boards, and like I said, I've run these through the table saw and I've cleaned them up and gotten everything straight and true and flat. So the first step in the process is I'm going to have to create a recess in one of these boards to accept the dimensions of the blade. I quite obviously have to remove some material so the blade sits in there nice, so that when I put the other piece of wood on top, there's a void in there so you can still extract the machete out of here. Now I have to do this in such a way that it'll hold it and it won't just fall out and slide out, and two, still have enough room to hold the blade itself. But quite obviously the first step in the process is I'm going to have to mark out where this blade needs to, where I need to run the router, and where this blade needs to be sitting in the wood. So I'm basically going to just trace this out. I'm going to grab a pencil and we're going to trace this out. Okay, so I've got my board locked up in my vise. Now I'm going to take and I'm just going to lay my machete here, and to help ensure that things just stay where they're stay put and stay where they're supposed to stay, I'm just going to take a clamp and I'm going to clamp the blade in place. Okay, so I've got the blade, I've got the handle of the blade butted right up against the wood here. It's flush, and now I'm just going to take a pencil and I'm just going to draw out the shape of the blade. Okay, so that's where I want my blade to lay out. You can see the blade's got a curve to it, so it's fatter here than it is here. So I'm just going to take my machete and I'm going to bring it down. I'm just going to set it here like this. And this is the fattest part of the blade right there. So I'm basically going to have to route a straight line all the way through here. So I'm just going to take the piece of wood that I've got for the other side, which I know is straight enough, and draw a straight line. So now all of this material has to be removed. But like I said, I want to be able to keep this in here, and I want it to be in such a way that it's going to be staying captive. So what I'm going to do is the first 2 inches of the blade, or of the scabbard, excuse me, I'm going to make it a little fatter here. So in other words, when I take my router and I route out all this material, I'm not going to route out quite as deep here, just fractions of an inch. I'm just going to make it a little thicker, so that way when I insert the blade in here, this last 2 inches of wood is going to be clamping down on the blade and holding it captive. I've got my Dremel tool here, and I've got the router face, or the router attachment on it, and I've got a 1/4 inch router bit in here. And so what we have to do is I have to set the router depth to the thickness of the blade minus a little bit, because I'm going to do the first 2 inches first. So I'm just going to make a little adjustment here. Clamp it down, check it. That's a little too much. Clamp it down, check it again. Still a little too much. Just a hair more. Now when you're turning on this thumb screw, don't do like I did in Medilla Gorilla this thing. I actually broke it. Honestly, I broke it the first time I used it, so I had to come up with a little bit of glue and fix it. So be very gentle when you're using that. Okay, that's about right. I've got about the thickness of a piece of paper difference there. And that should be just enough, and if I have to make some fine-tune adjustments, I can do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to router out these first 2 inches with that adjustment, which is leaving the wood just a little thicker. So I'm going to set my router bit up here as such, and I'm going to make one pass down the middle, and then I'm going to make a pass along each edge. That way when I go to take out the material on each side, I'll have a good stable foundation on both sides of my router to support it. So I'm going to start off at the edge here, turn the router on, and make my first 3 passes. So there's the first pass, kind of down the middle. It doesn't have to be straight, it just needs to be there. Now the second pass I'm going to make, and I'm going to make it following my pencil line. Now, have you noticed that before I remove the router, I always shut it off first? That's a good practice to get into. That way, when you're lifting the router off your piece of wood, there's no chance that you're going to accidentally nick something that you don't want to nick. So when I'm finishing up my cut, I just make sure I hold it in place really, really well, and then I shut the router off. And when the router stops spinning, then I pick it up off of here. That's just a good practice to get into for not only safety, but also for not making any mistakes. All right, I've made my first 3 passes, and I've made them up to my first pencil line of 2 inches. Now I'm going to go and I'm just going to remove all the rest of this wood. All right, so now the rest I can fine tune with sandpaper when it comes down to it. Now I'm going to reset my router to the thickness of the blade so there's plenty of room for the blade to get in there. Okay, there it is. And I'm basically going to follow the same process. So that's what happens in professional TV, ladies and gentlemen. I thought I hit record on the camera and I didn't. So I started off here. You can see this is my first 2 inches that I left fat. And then I made a groove here, and now I'm going to start routering out all the rest of the material with the router set at the blade thickness that it needs to be to make room for the blade. All right. So there we've got our basic outline of our scabbard. And I can see I've got to take a little more material off here. I didn't quite reach up to the pencil line, so we're going to fine tune that. In fact, we got to take a little bit off the whole way. So we're going to make one more pass right here, being very, very careful to try and stay along the line and make it so it fits. Okay, that should work. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to put these two halves together, and I'm going to clamp them together to see how tight the fit is. Okay, it's a little tighter than I'd like it to be. It takes too much pressure to force it in and out. So I'm going to take a little more off of that, off of my friction area. I'm not going to get too crazy with it. I don't want to take off too much. I still want a good friction fit. Got a good sharp chisel here, and I'm just taking off tiny little shavings. Closer, but still not quite there. Going to make some fine-tune adjustments. Take a fine wood file. Try that. We are that close. I am down to now using a fine wood file to fine-tune it. Much closer. Still have to put too much pressure on it to pull it out. But we're extremely close. You can see I left marks here where the blade was dragging, and we basically have to take those marks out. There it is. That's the way it's going to stay. So now we've got everything the way it's supposed to be. Now we have to connect the two boards together. And I'm going to have to use some kind of a glue. But the problem we're going to run into here is squeeze out. So I'm going to be able to put a couple of screws in here and there to help keep this thing together. But more than anything, the problem we're going to have is squeeze out. And I don't want to get a bunch of squeeze out into the chamber where the machete is going to sit, because that's going to create some problems down the road. So if I put glue on here, I've got to put such a small amount of glue that I'm assured that I'm not going to get any squeeze out. And then I'm going to have to use some very small screws here to affix this, or to screw this together, is to do two things. One, I don't want to split the wood, so I'm going to have to pre-drill. And two, I don't want them so fat that they're gaudy and ugly looking. And I believe I have some screws that'll fit the bill. All right, so the screws I've got are number 8 1 3/4 screws. Now it's what I have laying around, and obviously these 1 3/4 screws are going to go through, so I'm going to have to go through and I'm going to have to grind these screws off on the other side, but that's okay. This is a very functional piece. I'm not making it to be a show piece. If I was doing that, I would obviously be doing things a lot different, and I would get screws that are right size. But you can see the screw is 1/3 of the width of the wood that's left, so I'm going to have to pre-drill this. Otherwise, I'm going to have problems with the wood splitting out, and it's going to be very close to the edge. So I'm going to chuck up a number 50 drill bit just to get a pre-drill on these holes. And it doesn't need to be much. All you're doing when you're pre-drilling is you're relieving some of the stresses in the wood. So I know I got to be right here. There's the edge of my wood. And right there is the edge of my wood. I can't go any further in than that. So I'm going to take and clamp these back together. Make sure everything's lined up. And I'm going to pre-drill the first holes. And then I'm going to do some countersinking. I'm going to countersink each one of these so that when the screw head goes in, it's not trying to force the wood apart. That should be pretty close. And I can see it's already trying to split the wood. So I'm going to have to do some repairing there. Even with the pre-drill. So I can repair that. I'm not going to take it apart, and I'm not going to stop doing it. I'm going to continue to use this. So let's go down and let's pre-drill a few more holes. Now we're going to go through and we're going to countersink them all. Stripped out my bit. All else fails, go to manual. You saw that it split there, the bottom board a little bit, and you know what? That's fixable, and we're going to fix it. I don't run away from mistakes. I'm not going to hide mistakes from you. I'm going to show you what you can do to fix the mistakes once you've made them. Obviously, the first recourse of fixing mistakes would be to start over, which nobody likes to do. But you may not have the time, or you may not have the materials to start over. So we're going to fix it. sink these just a little more. Okay, so the first mistake we have to fix is this one right here. That's a very easy one to fix. I've got a little bit of medium weight CA glue here. We're just going to put a little of that CA glue right there in the crack. Let it soak down in there a little bit, which it's doing very nicely. Very good. I'm going to take my clamp. Clamp it together. Once I've got it clamped together, I'm going to take a little activator. Activate it. Leave that clamp on there, and that'll set up. And that'll actually be stronger than the wood. That CA glue is some pretty incredible stuff. Now I had another one over here, right here, that's split out. Again, that's fixable. We're just going to clamp it. Use that same medium weight CA glue. Put some in that crack. Put some in that crack. And these screws are never coming out again. So I'm going around the screw. These things are all staying right where they're at. Make sure that that crack gets nice and filled. Now I'm going to loosen my vise up a little bit. Let that CA glue work down in there. Clamp it in there nice and tight. Give it just a little more. We can sand all this off later. Just like that. Clamp it back down. Little activator. And we're going to let that sit. All right, it's been a few minutes. That CA glue should be good and set up. So now we're gonna remove these clamps, and we're gonna take it out of the vise. I'm gonna take this over to the belt grinder, and we're gonna knock these screw heads off. All right, so we're over here we're at my 2x48 belt grinder, which I did build myself. We're gonna knock these screw heads off. I got it loaded up with a kind of half worn out 150 grit belt. It's a great belt to go ahead and knock screw heads off with, because if you ruin it, so be it. It's already half shot anyway. You know what? I'm not setting a very good example here. I should probably put on some eye protection, huh? Not a good idea. All right, so those screw heads are all nice and flush now. I did put some CA glue on this knot here that split out, so I'm just going to take and I'm going to run the sander over that as well and clean that up. All right, so we got it all cleaned up the way we want it to. Now we're going to go through and we're going to seal up the edges. so we get a good bond in there, and we're going to do that again with CA glue. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take some thin CA glue, and the neat stuff about this stuff is the screws are doing primarily most of the work, and all I want to do is really seal up the edges, but the CA glue will actually work itself down into the crack. So it's actually pretty cool stuff. I've used this stuff for quite a few projects, but let's just take and we're just going to put some right on the crack line there. Let it work its way down in there, and then I'm going to take the activator, spray the activator across the top of it. And yes, it does smoke like that. It's supposed to do that. So we've got that done. Now we're going to take and flip it over. Do the same thing on the other side. Now I got a bit of a void right here, so I'm going to repair that. I'm going to use some medium weight CA glue, and I'm going to fill that void up. Little activator. And we'll take the thin again. Now CA glue is essentially crazy glue with an attitude, really. You get some of this stuff on your fingers, you ain't getting it off. You're going to wear it off. It'll peel off in a couple of days, but you're pretty much stuck with it, if you will allow me that small pun. But you can see here, you can see how the CA glue has worked its way down into that edge, but it didn't get all the way through. So that means when I go to put my knife in here, there shouldn't be any CA glue holding it up. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to clean up the edges. Back to the belt sander. All right, we're back at the belt sander, and now that CA glue is set up, and that's what's nice about spraying the activator on there. It doesn't take long for it to do its thing, and we can clean these edges up. So now we're back at the belt sander. I still got that same half wore out 150 grit belt in here, and we're just going to clean the edges up. All right, let's go back over to the vise and do a little bit of fine tuning and tweaking, and we'll be ready to go. So just want to take, and I'm going to put this back in here, and I'm going to clamp it very gently now because it's all fairly smoothed out. And I'm just going to run over this with a sanding pad just to make sure that there's no little splinters left. Looks like we're pretty good. So let's have a test. Got this clamped onto my four-wheeler. Knife blade fits in just like it's supposed to. I see no glue on the edge of my blade, so that means that I didn't get any glue to come through. And there we go. Now I've got a wooden scabbard that I can attach and mount to my ATV, and my machete is accessible. It's in place. I haven't decided if I'm going to shoot this with a coat of paint or what I'm going to do with it, but I'll do something. I'll probably just paint it black because that's the color of my ATV. But as you can see, I can shake this thing up and down, and that that blade is not coming out of there until I physically remove it. And it goes right back in like it's supposed to. So there you go. Wooden scabbard for a machete that I'm going to mount to my ATV. So there you have it, today's build. I built a scabbard out of wood so I could mount my machete to my ATV. This is something I've been wanting to do for a while. There isn't really a great solution or a solution that I liked for on the retail side, so I just decided I was going to make it. Now everything we did here today and everything I used was stuff I had lying around. I didn't make a special run trip to my home center, and I just used stuff I had lying around. The only really special tools I used was I used a table saw to size the lumber, and I did that off camera previously before starting the video. And I used my Dremel tool. There aren't too many households in the country anymore that don't have some sort of a rotary tool. You can buy the Dremel head attachment and the bits for the router, or the router head attachment and the bits for the router. You can buy those on Amazon for about $20. In fact, I think you can get them in a kit. So everything I used I had laying around. Screws I used I had from a project when I built my last deck. I have no sense in throwing screws away. Just basic hand tools and a little bit of time. I think I've got, including shooting the video, I've got approximately an hour and a half into making this very simple wood scabbard, which is going to be very, very functional. Now I haven't decided on a finish yet, and I will do that at another time. I think I'm probably just going to paint it black and then mount it to my ATV. So at any rate, if you got any questions on what I did here or how I did it, please feel free to go into the comments below and let me know. I try really hard to answer the comments anytime I can. Please hit that like and subscribe button. The more likes I get, the more views I'm going to get on the YouTube front pages and splash pages. And the more subscriptions I get, the more visibility I'm going to get as well. So I'm not making any money off of this. I do this just purely because I like doing it, and I like to share my ideas. And maybe my ideas suck, and maybe my ideas are pretty good. If it helps out one or two people, it's worth the effort to me to go through and produce the video. So anyway, hope you enjoyed today's build. If you need it and you can't find it to buy it, think about making it. Put a little thought into it. Think of how you can make it out of what you have lying around, or maybe you do have to go buy a board. For what I had laying around in scraps and about an hour and a half or 2 hours of my time, I was able to make something that was functional that I'll be able to get some use out of. So until next time, this is Ed from Jack of All Trades. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and until next time, you stay busy. Thanks.